I'm asked often, what is the business case for nature? And I've been answering that to businesses and governments for 25 years, so I can make a financial business case. But to me, it still sounds like somebody comes to me and asks, so you have a family. What's the business case for being a good father or a good husband? And I'm like, yeah, well, I'm sure there is one.
Yeah.
It's probably it's probably good for your health, and then your kids will probably come and visit you more often when you're old if you're nice to them. So there's a business case, but at another point, that's also irrelevant because it's just the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And that relationship with nature is just the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And the importance here for everyday people is, what can we do? Go out and listen to nature. Doesn't even have to be far. Just go spend time in the elements, listen to nature, because nature can tell us ecological literacy, which is what we don't have right now as humanity. What I would advise anybody to do, and it's actually fun, it's good for your health, and it's usually free, is to learn ecological literacy by spending time in nature and then answering 3 basic questions. The first is, where does my food come from? What I eat every day, where is it farmed? How are these farmers treating their land? How does it get to my table? And you speak about that with your kids, they'll often know more about that than we do, because I think that awareness of where does our food come from, how does nature produce our food, is really a fundamental question. And it's a good question to start a relationship. Like, any good relationship often starts with food. The second question is, where does my water come from? Water is essential for life. We all know that. But few people would be able to point on a map to, this is my water reservoir. This is the mountain forest watershed where my water comes from. And the third question is, what other species live around me, and what does nature do for my home? Imagine you live in a city and you have urban trees. They probably someday will save your life, because in a heat wave, streets that have trees have significantly lower temperatures than cities and streets that don't.
Yeah.
So understand what nature does for you. And with that sort of starting basic ecological literacy, a lot of other things will follow. My book doesn't include a long to-do list for you to, only bike to work and recycle and only eat vegetarian food. I don't want to prescribe to anybody what they should eat, but I think once you have that ecological literacy, you will think differently about nature, and that will trigger a lot of changes in your behavior. And that's unique to every person on the planet. So we need to understand what is our role in that relationship, and we can have, each of us, a unique relationship with nature, and that will inform us about what we should do. So my advice in terms of practical things is, listen to nature and learn.
I love that, Tim. That's great advice. It was just as you were saying it, I was thinking, oh, good, I know where our water comes from here, where I'm living. But the reason I do is because it's next to some quite well-known land in Healesville here around in Melbourne, and anyone who lives in Melbourne will know where Healesville is, because there is a wildlife park near there, and it's a lot of tourists go there because you can be guaranteed to see a kangaroo. So it's interesting that because it's there, I know where it is, but I would imagine there's a lot of other people that don't know where their water source is coming from, and also the food source, which is really interesting. Someone told me once that the richest people in the world really are the ones that can feed themselves and be self-sufficient in that area, because if things, let me just use this expression, turn to shit, it's money's not going to save you. It's the people that know how to, or who are growing their food and can sustain themselves that way, are going to be the richest people on the planet.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because we try to be as self-sufficient as possible here on our little farm. But it's a lot of hard work and it's a lot of time. And I actually would not recommend that to a lot of people, but rather have a healthy relationship with the farmers that,
Mm.
especially around your area, that produce seasonal local food that can be fresh to the table, try to establish farmers markets, sort of have a relationship with the farming community around the city where you live, or the village where you live. I think the farming is really underappreciated in the world. It is so hard and complex.
Mm.
Farmers always take a huge risk, especially now with unpredictable climate. My respect for farmers has grown by leaps and bounds since we bought this farm. And I have to say here, it's actually not me who runs it; it's my wife who runs and plans and manages the farm. I get to talk about it in conferences and on podcasts, but it's she runs the farm. But the farming is so complex, and you have to know so much about animal behavior and welfare and soil biodiversity and plant health and the seasons and the markets and marketing and,
Mm.
in our case, EU subsidies and regulations. So the amount of knowledge you need as a farmer is phenomenal, but it's also very gratifying, as you said, and very rewarding um, activity. So I think we'll
Mm.
need a lot more respect for the people who farm our
Mm.
food. And agriculture is to nature what energy is to the climate transition. It is the most important sector for the health or the demise of nature. Because at the moment, we have a lot of things in agriculture wrong. We need to get away from that extractive mindset that is basically sort of nutrient mining the land for short-term profit. What we need is a reestablishment of especially soil biodiversity, of healthy soils that will produce healthy food in perpetuity, instead of our current system of chemistry and fossil fuel based agriculture that uses basically a lot of inputs to create short term high harvests, but
Mm.
that depletes the soil and leads to soil erosion and leads to stopping that flywheel of life that produces abundance and diversity.
Yep. Yep. Well, I know that when I did research for the interview and I saw that you had your farm there as well, I thought that would give you quite a bit of credibility there. So you've got the high level policy space, which you used to being, but also you got the on the ground experience. So I would imagine that gives you a major source of credibility. I know you haven't done it for the credibility, but it really seems like well, you can see that you're walking the talk.
Well, we try to. It's work in progress. But what we see already at the farm is nature's amazing ability to bounce back to abundance and diversity that then creates a much more resilient system. That is nature's natural state. And we've sort of pushed agriculture into the opposite corner of being a very fragile system that is highly dependent on external inputs, and in particular fossil fuels and industrial fertilizers. So what we see is, when you shift away from that, how quickly nature comes back. We established a little lake here behind the farm, and 2 months after it was there, we had 8 of the 15 species of bats that you can find in Denmark already circling again over the lake. We did some echolocation monitoring. We just planted some pollinator flower strips, and to see the insect diversity that is coming back very quickly to what was a very non-biodiverse monoculture field, it's astounding. So that makes me really hopeful that nature is it's almost as if nature is waiting for that opportunity to bounce back and come back
Mm.
to its natural state of abundance and diversity.
I did see it was a video, a movie, short film about what would happen if every human being left the planet, and it showed the cities and how nature took over. And I guess the main takeaway for me was that, like you were saying just then, nature is able to come back and bounce back. We have to give it the we have to get out of its way in a way because it'll do it naturally, as
Well,
you say.
I don't quite agree with that, actually. I know that
Okay,
view is widespread, and
right.
you often even hear it in conservation circles. He is saying that nature doesn't need us, but we need nature.
Mm-hmm.
That might be true, but we are part of nature. And not only that, we are nature's most powerful ecosystem engineers. The concept of ecosystem engineers, like elephants are ecosystem engineers, for example, or beavers, or um, these are species that shape entire ecosystems so that many other species can live there.
Mm-hmm.
And if you take that concept and project it onto humanity, we are certainly the most powerful species as an ecosystem engineer. We have both the power to destroy, but we also have the power to create and constructively build ecosystems. So
Mm-hmm.
I would like us to see, I would like humans to be in that role of stewards and guardians of creation, because this is about us and it's about how we rebuild this experiment called human civilization. Either we're now going into a nosedive and will go the way of many civilizations over the past thousands of years that have had dips and highs, and often where an overuse of ecological resources led to a collapse of civilizations. There are great books written about that. And in my book, I have one example in ancient Greece where, because of the fight for naval supremacy and naval power in the Mediterranean, all the countries there cut everything that could make a ship, all the large trees, all the forests. And in the year around 400 before the Common Era, there was nothing but food for bees left in the hills around Athens. All the trees had gone. And then the philosophers of that time, Socrates and Aristotle and even Plato before, and we had all written about this need to reestablish that connection with nature. And that ushered in what I call in the book a century of ecology. So there were laws passed that established a lot of new forests. It was put under severe penalty to collect even firewood across the city. So for about 100 years, ancient Greece, invested very heavily in restoring nature. And that rebuilt their political and their military power. I mean, they still went and conquered Macedonia and other places to cut the forest there. So it wasn't really, the wisdom didn't last. But that kind of a century of ecology is what we need now. Otherwise, we'll also hit rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
We're on a pretty fast way there at the moment, but we can turn it around.
Yeah.
So I think we can learn from history, but it's high time.
Yeah, I can hear that historical knowledge in what you've spoken about in this conversation, and yeah, it's just wonderful how you go back to some of the past things to understand how we can deal what's worked and how we can deal with what we're managing now. I wanted to ask you. I was surprised when we were first setting up the interview that you work for Salesforce. Because I see Salesforce as a IT company, and you're the climate action vice president at Salesforce. So I guess it's a great way of demonstrating and seeing how the major corporations can make a difference. But can you tell me how that role came about and how you came to be in it, and why a
Sure,
tech
I'll
company does that?
tell you the story of how I joined Salesforce, which I actually never thought I would, because I spent my entire career in public service. I spent 15 years with the UN, and even before that, I worked for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature and the European Commission. And when you're, especially at the UN, there's a bit of a skepticism towards the private sector that, it's all about greenwashing and they talk a good talk, but they don't really do stuff
Mm.
um, other than pollute the environment. So I was skeptical about large multi-billion-dollar corporations. Well, what happened then was when I was at UNEP, Salesforce and the World Economic Forum established something called the Trillion Trees Initiative in 2020 because Salesforce's co-founder and CEO, Mark Benioff, really invested in forests and ocean health in particular. So he coined this term 1T.org for the trillion trees that we needed to bring back or conserve to ensure we have a stable climate. And I advised them a little bit on how to set that initiative up and what to do. And then once it was running and Salesforce started to invest in forest ecosystem restoration and conservation, they kept calling me for advice and said, well, what should we do now? And who should we work with? And what's the credible way to do this? And at some point they said, well, we talk to you so often. Why don't you just come and run our 100 million tree commitment and also set up a nature program and a team and a nature strategy for the company. And I joined them about 3.5 years ago, and now I'm responsible for all our climate activities, including nature and watershed resilience. So we invest a lot in restoration of forests across areas, in particular where the company has water dependencies, so where we have large offices or where we have data center dependencies. And it's been very rewarding, especially because Salesforce has about 200,000 institutional and corporate customers. So basically all the world's Fortune 500 companies, 60,000 NGOs, a lot of other big companies have a trust relationship with Salesforce because we manage their data. And so their sustainability teams often speak with us and say, well, what have you learned? What is this thing called biodiversity that we've heard about that is, we need to do something about? What should we do about carbon credits? What is the voluntary carbon market? So it's a position where I feel I can really influence a lot what other companies are thinking, what they should be doing. We try to lead by example. So it's it's been an ongoing, fascinating journey. But I joined mostly because at the moment, what we need is innovation and speed, and that's really something the private sector can provide. We also need strong government action, and we definitely need the UN. But the private sector also has to step up more.
Yeah. Thanks for explaining that. That's quite fascinating. And let's say I gave you a magic wand, Tim, and you could make one major change in this area. What would you do straight away with that magic wand?
I would reshuffle taxpayer money, subsidies that are being spent in the trillions. There's about $5 trillion that are spent on fossil fuel subsidies per year. And I would reshift that so that rural populations, farmers, and people who are responsible for managing ecosystems get rewarded for rebuilding them. It would create millions of jobs. It would really be a boom to the rural economy in many countries. And it would stabilize the climate, and it would rebuild nature at planetary scale. The only loser would be the fossil fuel industry, and they're very sore losers. So they don't really, they do what they can to avoid that. But I think with the energy transition and the price of solar and wind in particular falling so drastically, and now we're starting to see that the fossil fuel industry is a model that has to phase out and is phasing out. So if I had a magic wand, I would redirect all that taxpayer money, that our hard-earned money that is being spent on the wrong things.
Yeah, fair enough, and that's in line what you were saying earlier. And this I'm really interested as well because I can hear that you're very motivated and focus on the goals and aspirations that you've got, but I'm sure that there's challenging times in front of you in terms of the things that you need to deal with. You've spoken about some of those big challenges, but I'm interested in personally, Tim, how do you stay motivated and what kind of mindsets do you integrate into your being to be able to achieve what you need to do, get up in the morning sometimes in the face of no agreement and just keep going with what you're doing?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, because I think for all of us, it is it is important to find that motivation for whatever it is we want to do. What really helps me is that I meditate every day, and that kind of grounding is really useful because at the end of the day, it it matters more that you do what you can and you play your role than whether you succeed or not. Because there are different levels of reality, right? There is the reality of the material world, but there's also the personality that we bring into this world, and while we're here, the role that we play. And it is important to play that role to your fullest. The outcome is actually less important. That might sound, not very helpful if you're confronted with big challenges, but what it does is it triggers a mindset of optimism. And that is really essential, especially in my line of work of working on things like climate change and biodiversity loss. If you're not optimistic, you will not achieve anything. And I think that optimism has to be cultivated from an active decision to be optimistic. When I say optimistic, I actually mean not optimism, unconditional optimism, like a child waiting for presents. You sit around and say, well, everything will be all right. No, it's conditional optimism, which is more like a child wanting to build a tree house, and it runs around and mobilizes all their friends and their parents and says, well, we get these tools and then we do this and then we can build something really cool if we all work together. And then at some point it happens because it's infectious. That action creates more hope. More hope creates more action. So that optimism is where it starts. You have to be optimistic. There's just no other way.
Wonderful, Tim. I'm glad you spoke about optimism. And I can hear that in your answers, even when we were talking about, I wouldn't say dark things, but some serious challenges that we're facing. And we're very optimistic here at Rise and Thrive Conversations for Greatness. One of the first episodes, we had a gentleman by the name of Victor Purton, and he's known as the Optimism Man. And he talked about optimism being the fuel for greatness, and some of the things that you've spoken about there as well, as that is the fuel to keep going. And his definition of optimism is wonderful, that things will always work out. And so, yeah, we speak about that a little bit on the show, and so I'm glad you raised it. Now, you've spoken about your book. It's a great book. I'm sure it's intrigued our listeners. How can our listeners get a hold of it?
Well, I actually just saw that in Australia. It's not yet on Amazon or on other platforms, but it will be shortly. It's definitely available on Amazon, Indigo, Barnes & Noble, Porchlight, Books A Million. There's all these major online platforms. But what a lot of my friends have told me is they've walked into their local brick and mortar bookstore and ordered a copy, because I think we also need to support local businesses. So that's what I would recommend. It's published by Wiley, which is a very large US-based publisher. So it should be available easily around at least the English-speaking world for now, and waiting for other languages. But it should be easy to get a hold of. TimChristophersen.com has all the links.
Great. I'll have all those links in the show notes as well. And there's a couple of questions that I ask all my guests. This is a conversation for greatness, and I would like to know what greatness means to you.
Greatness means becoming a better person. It's not something that you ever achieve and then it's there. It's something you have to strive for every day. It's a process, like all of life. Greatness is trying to become a better human being.
Great. And we have a Spotify motivational playlist, and it kind of started as a motivational playlist, but now really it's a Rise and Thrive Conversations for Greatness guest playlist, because each guest, that's the only way a song gets on there, each guest on the show, I ask, what's that song that you would put on or play when you really need that kind of energetic lift, or you just need a lift? Have you got a go-to song?
I do, and I'm sure it's already on the list. It's Don't Stop Believing by Journey.
It is on the list, yeah.
And I coach a volleyball team that I started here in our little village about a year ago. And we also have a volleyball playlist, of course, with a lot of these songs that are upbeat and energetic. So I can send you a lot more, but I think "Don't Stop Believing" is the one that I would go to if I had a moment of doubt.
Yeah, that's great. It's on there, so I can't put it on there twice, but that's reinforced. And yeah, if you think of something else or send me something, I'll definitely put your song on there, Tim. And
"Unstoppable" by Sia is probably already on it as well.
I'm not sure actually. I can check that.
It's a
Uh,
good one too.
Yeah, great. All right, I'll check that out, and it's a real buzz for me because when I hear the songs, it always reminds me of the wonderful guests that we've had on, Tim. Now, this is a bit of a what we'd say in Australia as a bit of a cop out question, which is I'm going to ask you: is there a question that I haven't asked you that you wish I had?
The question I get sometimes asked is, why did you write a book? And I tried to answer that a little bit earlier, but I think the reason I wrote a book is also I would like that book to be not necessarily a bestseller. I think it will do well, but I would like the book to be an important book, a book that people still talk about in 10 or 20 years from now, because it asks big questions that are not often asked. And in times of crisis, it sometimes helps to make a big problem even bigger by looking at the connections with other problems and then try to solve them. So that's why I wrote the book. So I hope your listeners are up for that challenge to ask some of the big questions about the future of this experiment that we're all in, this fascinating experiment called humanity. And thank you for this wonderful conversation.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure, Tim. I love your take on everything. I love how it's really practical as well. It's not all up in the sky there, and it's like, oh God, how are we gonna manage that? It's practical. It's down to earth. I love how when I explained or when I said about how nature could take over easily without us, how your take on that about no, we're all in this together and we can make it work even better than it is now. I really, really love that. That's one of the major driving points that I'm taking away from the conversation. And I love the three things that we can all do straight away. Now, a lot of these things, listeners, are in the book, so I encourage you to get yourself a copy. Tim, it's been an absolute pleasure having this conversation with you. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Likewise. Thank you so much, John.